Hello, everybody. Today, we continue the conversation with Thomas777 about the revisionism of the Second World War that we had last time. So, Thomas, thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me.
Okay. So today, we're mostly gonna talk about books and podcasts that we recommend for you to read and listen if you are interested to learn more about the issue of the revisionism of the Second World War. But before we go to that, I would like to ask a few questions that I didn't have time to ask last time. So my main question I wanted to ask you, Thomas, is that you're probably aware that last September, Tucker Carlson interviewed a guy named Daryl Cooper, and in that interview, Daryl Cooper said that for him, Winston Churchill was the main villain of World War II, and Tucker Carlson, let him talk about it. So,
Well, yeah, he cited a bunch of my content. I mean, he's not directly, but he was word for word that it was a bunch of stuff I'd said. Yeah, I'm aware of it.
Okay, so you're aware of that?
Yeah.
Okay, me when I found that interview and that I listened to it, I was really amazed because Tucker Carlson is someone who is known by a lot of people. So that thing made noise. If I remember well, there was a the website of the White House, the U.S. government was mad about it. They didn't like it. They criticized Tucker Carlson. So for me, I saw it as an important. I'm searching the word. Sorry, but it's like we achieved. If for those of us who wants to debunk the myth of the Second World War and tell the truth about it, do you agree that this interview was kind of an important milestone that it was achieved?
Yeah, and to be clear, just what I said a moment ago, I'm not just chasing clout. Like, Cooper was in touch with me. I know him through a mutual friend. I don't know him well, but I mean, I've communicated with him. And yeah, like I said, word for word, that was my content. I mean, like so I'm not mad about that. It's fine. But there's been a shift in conceptual perspective that's dramatic. And I mean, that owes to a few things. I mean, first and foremost, the degree to which court historians had a true bully pulpit, for decades, that can't be overstated. And when really the only medium that people are truly engaged with in any kind of ongoing and daily capacity is television, narratives can really be structured in a way that's discrete and absolute and really can't be challenged. And the degree to which television, it's not immersive in the same way internet is, but it's immersive enough that it really becomes insinuated into people's, conscious and subconscious mind. And it almost becomes indistinguishable from concrete experience. So I mean, that was really a huge part of how like revisionist perspectives could be kind of pushed out of the conversation. And secondly, there's less there's less ability to kind of remove discussion of the war from normal historiographical parameters, because the war generation is essentially completely passed away now, and for better or worse, depending on where you fall in the question, there really is like a global society, like in America, where there's people who aren't susceptible to these kinds of irrational appeals to kind of political theology and moralizing.
Yeah.
So you can't just shut down conversations by saying like, oh well, but the German Reich's uniquely evil because it's the enemy of the Jewish people. and the Jewish people is uniquely martyred population. Like
Yeah.
nobody takes that seriously anymore.
Yeah.
You know, like it and part of it too is obviously, you know, like the politics of the day, like America's waging these like irrational wars on the Islamic world, on Russia, on, you know, half a dozen other societies at any given time. Israel, you got creeps like Mr. Netanyahu going on TV declaring basically that his country has some absolute right to like racial purity and they can kill as many people as they want towards that objective. You know, people are just looking at this like this doesn't make any sense, you know, and enough is enough. You know, like they're not just going to accept these narratives that, you know, that you know that there's some sort of absolute moral paradigm, you know, whereby the enemies of Israel are just irredeemably evil, or that people that the U.S. government or countries the U.S. government decides that it wants to assault are just somehow, you know, outside of the community of human beings or something. Like that's not something people will tolerate anymore. Like even people aren't particularly engaged politically. So I think it's all of those things, you know, and also the internet. The second part of this too is on the internet, and especially young people. Sometimes I get mad when people trash young people because it's like Zoomer type guys and girls. Like they're the ones who took a real critical eye and in some cases a proverbial hammer to a lot of these shibboleths and started saying like, you know, they just wouldn't let stuff stand when it was just declared by, you know, some court academic or something like, well, this is just the way you must perceive the Second World War, and you know anybody who was on the losing side of that conflict was just irredeemably evil. You know, like a lot of people, and again, not exclusively, but substantially, this kind of younger coterie, they started making fun of these people and saying like that's ridiculous. You know, you can't just make these, you can't just argue by assertion and issue these kinds of sweeping declarations and expect to not be challenged. You know, that's not how things are. So the internet really kind of democratized the conversation, and I don't think like democracy is some great thing in the terms that we're discussing it, but sometimes it serves its purpose by acting as a check on what would otherwise, you know, be kind of like an exclusive discursive domain. So I think it's all those things.
But I don't know if you're aware also that Elon Musk reposted the interview of Tucker Carlson with Daryl Cooper, but he deleted it later. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I didn't see it, but somebody mentioned it to me. Yeah. I'm aware of that. No, Musk is a strange guy. I mean, and I don't think I think like a lot of I don't want to derail the conversation or do a discussion of Elon Musk's character and intellectual propensities, but like a lot of, I mean, he's kind of an eccentric anyway, but like a lot of guys, a lot of tech engineering types, like they don't really grasp politics in a meaningful way. Like if they did, I mean, there's a reason why like human societies aren't run by scientists and engineers. You know, like I think he's got certain blind spots aside from the fact that he abides certain moral strictures inherent to mainstream political opinions for reasons of public relations. But I think he also just doesn't have a great grasp of this stuff. So he's easily swayed, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Okay. So I was really glad when I saw that. For me, it was a milestone because World War II revisionism, I told myself, will no longer be limited to, I don't want to use a bad word for that, but for marginal people like, let's say, you and me. And I don't say that in a way to insult you or anything, but
I understand.
Yeah. So a lot of people were, I mean, Daryl Cooper podcast went to #1 or almost #1 for a while. And I know he's not a guy that liked to be interviewed a lot, but I know that he gave an interview to Dave Smith and Scott Horton in the weeks that followed. So, and those people still don't have the audience of the listener, that they don't have the listenership of Tucker Carlson. Though I think that Dave Smith was interviewed by Tucker Carlson once. I hope that Scott Horton would be interviewed soon by Carlson, and of course, I would wish to you the same. But I don't know if you think it's possible. But you have great things to teach people. That's why I'm very glad that you do that. You do this with me again today. Okay, my other question is a question from a listener. It's a very specific question about something that happened in Nazi Germany, and I could not answer because it was something too specific. So apparently, in November 1939, there was a man named Georg Elser that tried to kill Hitler. Do you know a little
Yeah,
bit about that?
yeah, I do.
Okay, so my listener, who is in fact a German man that was born in November 1939, and who remembered having his house destroyed by the Royal Air Force, and he asked me if you knew what do you know more. What details do you know about that? Because he wondered if why Hitler had stopped his speech he was giving.
Yeah,
In
it was very weird.
the Burger Braukeller, a place like that. I'm sorry, I wrote it too small on my paper. So my listener wanted to know what do you know about that, and if you know why Hitler interrupted his speech, which apparently would have saved his life.
It yeah, that's one of the reasons, Hitler, the July 20 plot is what's kind of is the most famous, assassination attempt on the Fuhrer's life. And it was made into this kind of hokey movie with Tom Cruise, who plays von Stauffenberg. But there's multiple attempts on Hitler's life that he survived kind of at the last minute. And the reason for the 1939 speech at the Bürgerbräukeller was it was the commemoration of the Munich Putsch, and there's like a ceremony annually, like on or around like November 9th.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become it became something of a National Socialist myth that, well, there's a providential aura around Hitler. That's why he survived the Great War despite having a very dangerous job. That's why, and so there was, I can't remember who it was. It was one of the Sturmabteilung, like security detail. He relayed that, like, he relayed this kind of very melodramatic story where, like, well, Hitler Hitler got a strange look on his face and, like, abruptly ended the speech. Like, some people claim that didn't really happen, but he did apparently cut short the talk. And Hitler's health wasn't great. I mean, really, I believe this is, I don't want to derail the discussion, but I believe Hitler's Parkinson's. I believe Hitler absolutely exhibited symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and it probably came from chemical weapons exposure. Like, people forget, in proximity to Ypres, Hitler was hit in a gas attack in 1918, and he was severely injured. So his health was bad. The weirdest things about Elser, he wasn't executed until 1945.
Yes.
He was. That's the real. If people are conspiracy minded, I think that's what they'd focus on. So Elser, when he was identified, like, he built this bomb, which had a kind of, it was crude, but it was well engineered. It had like a time delay fuse essentially, and he'd squirreled it away in one of in the wall, because he'd snuck into the Bürgerbräukeller like a day before, and so presumably, and he claimed under interrogation, which presumably he was subjected to torturous techniques. He claimed he just hated the Nazi Party and he did this by himself, which seems unlikely. But then he was squirreled away to a prison camp, and throughout the war, he was held in detention, and then finally, a week before Hitler's own death, April 9th or so, 1945, when the Reich was going down in flames, literally, he was unceremoniously just executed.
Yeah.
So the whole thing makes very little sense. But the all the major assassination attempts around Hitler are strange. I mean, the July 20 plot is strange, and one of the few things that is correct about that movie with Tom Cruise, Valkyrie, about the July 20 plot, when Goebbels got the communication, because Stauffenberg was convinced Hitler was dead, because the bomb went off and he was convinced that everybody in proximity to it was killed. So von Stauffenberg's co-conspirators, they radioed to Berlin that the Fuhrer was dead, a coup's underway, and Goebbels was going to be imminently arrested. When in fact Hitler was alive and well, none of this had actually happened, and what I'm getting is that suggests a deeper conspiracy than just a handful of these kinds of Catholic Junker officers who were upset about the way the war was going. So I mean, it's not, and I think a lot of the people would have known. They either held their peace, they didn't survive the war, in both cases. But I don't have any great insight into Elser's motives or why he was kept alive. But like I said, he spent most of his sentence at Dachau, for context. Elser did, but I can't comment on how Hitler averted that attempt. Other than that, he had a strange capability to apparently avert disaster in that regard.
Okay, but thank you very much. I hope my listener that asked me that question will be satisfied. You knew a lot more than me. I almost knew nothing about that. Okay, sure. So now I would like to talk about books and podcasts that people can listen if they want to know more. First, I would recommend, but I think in the part one of our conversation, I put in the notes links to your YouTube channel, your website, and also to the podcast of Pete Quinones, because you made a series on World War II with Pete. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if people want to learn more, it's a long series. As I said last time, I remember that I was listening to it while I worked on a farm. So,
yeah, that's great.
But for you, is there other podcasts that you would like to talk about that you think people should listen to?
I mean, one of my favorite, there's a YouTube channel. It's called Military 1945, Military 1945. It's by this guy, I think he's Canadian, but he focuses very much on the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, and he's very fluent in the German language, particularly the dialect of the era. He's got a great esteem for the military forces of the Third Reich, and he's a collector of artifacts, particularly testimonial artifacts. He gets a lot of war diaries from platoon and company level officers, and he's translated a lot of these. And what he does is in his content, he'll present the war diary, you say a company commander, or a lieutenant or a Hauptmann or what have you, and he'll describe the context of the events, the man in question is attesting to, and then he'll go from there and proffer a unit history, and then put that in the broader context of German armed forces in the war and the kinds of conditions they were facing and things like that. And I think that's important. I mean, I'm something of a historian, so I consider it to be God's work to preserve the testimony of of people who were witness and participants of these events. But in terms of more politically oriented revisionist content, there's not a lot of pods that do what I do. It's one of the reasons why, like, I started the podcast, because I think there's not enough direct discussion of that sort of thing. And as I get into season 3 of the pod in February, I mean, I've got a few different content brands going right now. But I'm gonna focus more on historical revisionism for kind of like my flagship brand, which is Mind Phaser. The historical authors who've had the biggest impact on me were Ernst Nolte, who was a disciple of and student of Martin Heidegger, David Irving, R.H.S. Stolfi, Joachim Hoffman, who wrote Stalin's War of Extermination, and who was a preeminent military historian in the Bundesrepublik. Those would probably be my top resources.
Okay.
But my background is probably somewhat unlike a lot of revisionists. I studied the law and legal theory and political theory pretty heavily. I didn't study history in college. I went to law school and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I put a premium on direct testimony and that kind of documentary evidence and things. So I tend to seek out original sources and things and kind of piece together the conceptual picture and the constellation of events and causes from there, if that makes any sense.
Okay. If you were to recommend some specific book, or what would be your favorite book that you would recommend someone to read if he wants to know more about the revisionism of the Second World War?
First and foremost, the seminal biography of Adolf Hitler is by John Toland. I mean, Toland was a great author. He also did a great history of Showa Japan. Yeah, that's it. And Hitler's surviving family, Toland was the only author that they would speak to. So he had that going for him. That's an essential book if you want to understand Hitler, and the only way to understand the German Reich is to understand Adolf Hitler. Okay.
I own the book, but I didn't read it. It's just that in the last month, I heard someone recommending that book, and I said I'm buying it for the future. So
no, it's highly readable. For a historical biography, it's a real page turner. But another what I consider essential, another book I consider essential is Ernst Nolte, The European Civil War.
I don't have it.
Yes, it's somewhat difficult to find an English translation, but you can find one. That's essential reading. It's very philosophically dense. It helps if you've got a rudimentary understanding of continental philosophy. It helps if you understand, kind of the key discussions throughout the Cold War, especially between people like Habermas on the left and people like Ernst Nolte on the right. A lot of it's a reaction to what I consider the pseudo scholarship of people like Ian Kershaw and Joachim Fest. But that shouldn't deter people. I mean, it's a dense read, but I consider that essential. Stalin's War of Extermination by Joachim Hoffman. That's an essential book. And Hitler Beyond. The title is Hitler Beyond Evil and Tyranny by R.H.S. Stolfi. That's the Hoffman book.
Okay. I didn't read it, but I bought it many years ago. It's gathering dust on a bookshelf. Can you repeat the title of Ernst Nolte? Because I knew about Ernst Nolte. He was severely criticized by Marxists to be
Yes, it's the book's the European Civil War.
European Civil War.
Yeah. And the other two I'd probably recommend on top of my head, like I said, Hitler, Beyond Evil and Tyranny by R.H.S. Stolfi, Stolfi.
Hitler's Beyond
It's
Evil.
Hitler, Beyond Evil and Tyranny. Yeah. He also wrote a book. I mean, and everything he wrote is what I think essential, what I consider essential. Like, he also wrote a book. It's oddly titled, but it's Hitler's Panzers East, World War II Reimagined. He was a naval war college type. He'd been in the Marine Corps, and he wrote a lot about conventional force structure and its reemergence as a significant quantity in the 1980s. And among other things, he advocated strongly for less reliance on nuclear forces and the removal of feeder nuclear weapons from Europe. He was a very interesting guy. So the stuff he wrote in the 80s about NATO force structure, controversial pact is important, but Hitler's Panzers East, that's an essential book because I think very, very few people actually understand the military aspect of World War II. They just don't understand it. And this should clarify some things. Finally, David Irving's entire catalog is very important, but if you're going to read just one book, you should read Hitler's War. Yeah, that's an important book. And
another book that I confess that I have not read, but that I wanted to own.
Yeah, and everything else aside from other things, yeah, I mean everything Irving wrote is worthwhile, and he had access to more witnesses to the events in question than any other historian, and like the list just goes on and on. I mean, like his book on the Luftwaffe, he literally sat down with Erhard Milch and like took his testimony over months. I mean, that there's no other historian who had access to those kinds of testimonial sources. So yeah, that's my short list.
Okay. Now let me ask you. I have also my own book that I like very much, that I would recommend myself, but I would like to know what you think about them, if you know them. I know that they are in the mid 2000, two books came out that were bestsellers and that were revisionist of the Second World War. Those two books were, one is by Pat Buchanan. You probably know Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War.
Yeah, it's a good book, and it basically is a restatement of guys like A.J.P. Taylor, like Harry Elmer Barnes, like David Irving. I mean, that's great. I mean, it's an at a glance kind of summary of the position. So yeah, it's a good book. It's kind of like a restatement of other authors' work product, which is fine. I mean, he cites them appropriately, but yeah, it's a good book.
Do you know about Human Smoke?
Yeah, it's interestingly structured. Yeah. It's a lot of anecdotes that kind of tend to demonstrate the fog of war around moral questions. Yeah, it's a good book. And like Norman Davies wrote No Simple Victory. Yeah, there was something of a...
And what I like about Human Smoke is that the author is a leftist, probably is a pacifist. Yeah. I imagine he must be on the left. So if people are not libertarian or don't agree with your philosophy, but they are interested in what we said, a book like Human Smoke is wonderful because it's from a pacifist perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. I got a copy of it. I got it when it came out. It's like boxed up somewhere, but yeah, it's worth a read.
Yeah, I read it twice, and I tried to invite Mr. Nicholson for an interview, and look, he told me that talking about violence, emotionally said that he told me he was not able anymore because of what happened right now in the world, the war in Russia, I think in Ukraine and Gaza, Palestine. He said that it touched.
I think that's probably sincere. He strikes
Yeah,
me as a
I have
guy,
met the
and
guy.
yeah.
I offered him. I tried to offer him compensation, and he thanked me. But so, do you know? I would say my favorite historian is Ralph Raico. He's a libertarian.
Right.
He died 8 years ago in 2016. I'm a big fan of that guy. Do you know about him?
Yeah, there's this book when I was in college. I went to Loyola University, and a lot of which was interesting in those days, and there was something of a libertarian coterie in the political science department, which is very much kind of oriented towards both classical thought and political theory. And there's this like libertarian reader that it had like Robert Nozick, it had a bunch of stuff, and yeah, like that's where I came across him. It wasn't any of his stuff on it was mostly his stuff on political economy. That it wasn't stuff on like War and Peace. But yeah, I know of him.
He's if people are interested, Ralph Raico gave a speech, I think in 1982, and that speech was recorded. Someone transcribed his speech through a book, but there is a speech that is available on YouTube called "The World at War" by Ralph Raico. It's a very good thing to listen to. And I think I had a conversation with Mark Webber
Yeah, he's a great
months
guy.
ago, and I asked Mark Webber about Raico, and he said that he was friends with the guy, and that I think he said he visited during the talk, during the conversation with Mark Webber. He told me that he had visited a Holocaust museum with Ralph Raico in Washington.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's
a lot of the old libertarian guys, including Murray Rothbard, who was an unusual character, but
yeah.
other than Joseph Schumpeter, I probably cite Murray Rothbard more than any other economist when I write about political economy. But the libertarians back then, they were pretty serious guys, and a lot of the IHR personages, yeah, there'd be some cross pollination with them and von Mises Institute types and stuff. I mean, unfortunately, that seems to kind of change, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me that Mark Webber and Raico were tight. Mark Webber's he's a great historian, man. I've only had occasion to talk to him a couple times on like podcasts and stuff, and I mean he's a real gentleman, and he's a guy I got a lot of respect for.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
There is, I think, this book that was published by the IHR called "The Forced War."
Yeah, David Hogan was from that. He was from that same coterie as Barnes, and like the Barnes Review, who's named for Harry Elmer Barnes. And there's the Barnes Review's still at it. They're still putting out good content. They made the transition to the information age pretty effectively. But yeah, David L. Hogan is worth reading too.
Now I have America's Second Crusade by William Henry Chamberlain.
Yep. Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
You know about that?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, it's again. I mean, there's a lot of great revisionist stuff out there. I mean, I've got the stuff that I rely on primarily, but I mean, all that stuff's worth reading. I mean, a lot of the emphases are different than my own, but yeah, there's.
A book that is also I thought that was recommended that I own and didn't read because it's too big is this one. It's Freedom Betrayed by an ex-US president. It's from what's his name? Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, Hoover gets kind of savaged by a lot of both mainstream historians and revisionists. I haven't read that, but I think Hoover was a flawed guy, but he's kind of unfairly maligned, and he was in an impossible situation. Like I find myself defending Hoover and Hoover and Harry Truman a lot because they're kind of opportunity targets by people on both the right and the left. But yeah, I haven't read it.
But Herbert Hoover, I think, died in 1964, but
Yeah.
he asked that this book would not be published until 50 years after his death. So that book was only published in 2014, which means he knew that what he would say would kind of upset the establishment.
Yeah, no, he became like I said, even in the era, obviously the New Dealers held him out as some sort of inept fool or some kind of quote unquote traitor. But even like a lot of America First types, like they held him out as somehow responsible for the Wall Street crash by and they like especially a lot of supply siders they kind of try and hold him out as like as kind of like Roosevelt 1.0 in terms of obviously not in terms of his global politique or his foreign policy, but in terms of his attempts at remedying like the burgeoning crisis. But it's more complicated than that.
Here I have a book by probably a leftist and a pacifist called "The Good War That Wasn't and Why It Matters" by Ted Grimsrud. You heard of that?
No, but like I said, I mean, there's been in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of critical content. Some better than some more worthwhile than others, but yeah.
It's a book that it's similar to Human Smoke by Baker. It's from a pacifist, so.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's if someone is a leftist and a pacifist, and he doesn't, and that person hesitates about the Second World War, it's book for them. Here I have Worshipping the Myth of World War II, written by Edward Wood Jr. The guy was a veteran of the Second World War, and he wrote that book. Does that mean something to you?
No, but again, like I said, there's a lot of revisionist content that I have not read.
Okay, and a last one that it's a compilation. It's by two libertarians. It's Richard Ebling and Jacob Hornberger, which is the failure of America's foreign war. And in that book, they have a chapter on World War II. So that's another. So Tom, is there me? I asked what I wanted to ask you. Is there something else you would like to tell us? Other books that you would like to recommend?
I mean, not other than the ones that I already suggested. I mean, the thing I try and emphasize to people is you've got to go where your research takes you. And a lot of people they want some sort of like Cliff's Notes version or some kind of a roadmap, and that's not the way historical analysis works. Like you basically, especially as a revisionist, you got to take like a postulate, like what is like the postulate about the Second World War, or about World War I, or about the American Civil War, or about the administration of such and such president. You've got to ask yourself, like, okay, what is the postulate? What is like the perspective of court historians and what is like the nature of the narrative? And then you've got to like go from there. You've got to like, you've got to seek out direct testimony about the events in question. Then you've got to like analyze, the proximate causes, the conditions that characterize the event in question. and then you've got to proceed with a critical eye, and then you've got to get into anthropological factors and discrete cultural factors, and you've got to look at like the politics of the thing and how it was perceived in the era versus subsequent. I mean, like all of these things, and gradually, like this kind of this conceptual picture emerges, and people can either do it or they can't, like it's one of those things. But that's, all I can say is, be rigorous in confirming your sources and I identify from the outset what you're trying to accomplish. That's really all I got on that.
That's me. If I know, I try to be humble. I'm not super talented as a radio host or as a podcaster, but as I said at the beginning, I think that debunking the myth of World War II is very, very important because World War II is used to justify almost every war that the United States have done since 1945. They were all unjustified war. They were imperialism, but they were always referred to World War II to be justified. And for me, it's a lie. And what we are told about Nazi Germany, and people who knows me, I'm no fan of Nazi Germany, but the idea that Germany is that all evil from hell regime that we had no choice is a lie. The war was not only Germany's fault. I think it was, for me, it was a war. It was imperialism. So every most major power that participated in it had its part of guilt, but it's not what people are taught. And we are at a point that, again, what the war in Ukraine, if it would degenerate, it could mean the end of mankind if people start pressing the buttons for nukes and seeing people that support, like just the last election, the Kamala Harris and the Democrats wanted to escalate the war. And it's a reason that I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but the fact that he said that he would try to end the war, for me, was reason enough to prefer him. So, but I think as long as World War II has not been debunked, the danger of war and the destruction of our civilization is an issue. So for me, I try to do my best to bring knowledge, and that's why I wanted to interview people like you and other people that probably knows a lot more or are way better than me, but all people that have different perspectives about that. So Thomas, I want to thank you very much. Is there a last word you want to say? Do you have project in the future or the next month, that things you do that may be related to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what I do full time. Like I said, I'm launching season 3 of the podcast in February. I'm going to the inauguration in Washington in a couple of days. I'm gonna record content there. I'm working on a couple of book manuscripts. It's ongoing. I'm hoping that'll see light of day in the spring. Which I think it will. Around May, sometime between like March and May. I'm hoping. But I mean that's all. I'm always at this stuff. I'm always staying as busy as I can within reason.
When you say a podcast, do you have a podcast of your own, or you talk? Yes, you have a podcast of your own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I didn't. Does that podcast has a name in a specific place where we can find it? I will put it in the notes.
Yeah, it's on Substack. It's real Thomas777.substack.com. I think that's where I put a lot of my content, including my podcast. you know.
Because I thought when you refer to podcast, I thought you for me in my mind, it referred to what you do with Pete.
No, I mean, I do a lot of things, a lot of people, but I have my own podcast.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I prefer to do.
Good to know. So Thomas, again, thank you very much. I wish you the best in the future, and I will relate all those links to you, and I recommend people to listen to you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. I appreciate you.